Hello and welcome to Army Focus Mechanicum. Finally, after 6 months, I'm finally filming my own Army Focus. Now, I did plan to do this in December last year, but for whatever reason, it never happened. But now, as we're all in lockdown, I thought it'd be a really good opportunity for me to get the Mechanicum out and talk to you about my favourite army in the Horus Heresy. So what have we got in front of us? We have got the result of about 2 years of collecting the newer version of my Mechanicum army, and we've got about 4,500 points of Ordo Reductor. Now, some of you may remember that when I first started into Heresy, I started off with just a standard Tagmata list, and I had a little bit of everything, but primarily focused on Battle Automata, which essentially had tons of Castellax and Thanatar, and when they were finally released, the Voltarex. That was my first Heresy army, and that was my first experience with an airbrush and the rules for Horus Heresy, and I absolutely loved that Legio Cybernetica list. I went to Gibraltar No Retreat. I took it to a load of tournaments all over the country and had some really fantastic success with. Then my mind kind of moved on to looking at a different army. I stayed with Mechanicum, of course, and then we resulted in what we have here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to break this down into 2 parts, because this army came about in 2 ways. So we'll start first of all with the Thalax, which you've got in front of you. I am going to get into some specifics surrounding the army, but I need to give you a little bit of a backstory to this army before we go any further, because it will give it a much better context as to why I went initially for the 45 Thalax list and then later on brought in the Ordo Reductor with the tanks. So my thought process for collecting an army starts with the rules. I read through the rulebook, the Mechanicum Red Book. I read through that and looked at all the different options, and I then looked inside myself. I noticed it might be a little bit deep, but I know the sort of personality I am, and if I'm involved in a project like the channel, or like a building an army, or like something at work, I kind of go 2 feet in. I give it my all, because I know if I don't give it my all, I won't bother with it. I'll just do like a little bit here, and then the project will just get absolutely shelved. So if I do anything in life, as well as building armies and whatever, I put everything into it. So if we look back at the Legio Cybernetica army that I had, on the one hand, it was really powerful. Loads of high strength, low OP. The Castellax were great at shooting, they were great in combat, and they were super resilient. And then they were buffed by the Dominus in the squad, regaining wounds, better initiative, all the firing twice, all the fantastic things that comes with Legio Cybernetica and Cybertheurgy. So some really great benefits there. The major downfall to the entire army was that Castellax are denial troops only, and they cannot capture objectives to score victory points. They can only deny, and they can only get points by killing stuff, which they were really good at. But if you couldn't stop those first 2 tactical marines, or those 2 scoring units to get onto objectives and score units really early on the game, you could never pull the game back unless you wiped your enemy out, which in some cases was really, really tough. So why did I enjoy playing it so much? Well, when I game, I throw my everything into a game. I go through highs and lows, and I start off like, I don't know how I'm going to do this, and then they get some good results, and then my emotions build really high, and then they drop down again. But that's just the sort of person I am. I'm a really emotive, sort of passionate person, and I love the roller coaster of emotion that comes through playing an army. Now, you might say to me, well, that sounds really stressful. Why don't you just pick a really nice, well-rounded list and go with that? You've got a little bit of scoring, you've got a little bit of heavy support, blah, 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 blah. And you're right, and I did that right at the beginning. I had, Myrmidons, Secutors, Transport, Tanks, Voltarex, Automata, Thralls, had everything, a little bit of everything. And I really enjoyed playing that way. But I just wanted to build lists that were really, really different, and having a complete Legio Cybernetica army was like, buff, that's the way to go. So that's why I built the Cybernetica. And then when I then decided to get rid of the Legio Cybernetica, I wanted a new project, and I wanted to revisit Mechanicum. And the reason why I did that was because towards the end of the Legio Cybernetica army, I went on a painting course at Incon Gaming, MKA, when Matt and Andy were working together as MKA doing a painting course. And I went there to paint Death Guard because I was thinking about, maybe I was going to dabble in the Legions. I thought maybe I'll start with Death Guard. This is about 2-3 years ago. But I picked up some Thalax, and I thought, I'll give them a try. I quite like the look of them, and I wanted to achieve a really high gloss red that I just wasn't getting. The paint job on my original Mechanicum was great, but I wanted to push it on a little bit further. That's why I went on the course. Anyway, I was really lucky enough for Andy to spend some time with me, and I said to him, look, I'm trying to paint this Thalax. I want like a really cool red. Can you help me out? And Andy, being the genius that he is, he went, oh yeah, why don't you try this, this, and this? And he did a little test for me, and I was blown away. I said, that is the red that I want for my new Mechanicum army. Anyway, so I went home, practiced a load, and the paint scheme that you see before you right now is the paint scheme that Andy developed. Well, he gave me an example, and then I developed it from there. So as a result of that painting course, my painting got a lot better than what it was. And so I figured, well, if I go back to painting the Mechanicum now, the two armies are going to look really different. And because of my personality, I like kind of consistency across the board, which is really annoying. So I sold the Legio Cybernetica to a friend, and then I embarked on this new project. And when I was building the list, I thought, well, wouldn't it be really cool to just have an army of Thalax? I think that would just be amazing. But on the flip side, it's a really hard army to play because you haven't got all those heavy support, and you haven't got all the options that are available to you in a well-rounded Mechanicum list, for example. So the 45 Thalax list was a Tagmata army. It was led by an Archmagos Prime, and essentially had a jump pack, or a jet pack rather, to keep up with the rest of the Thalax, double melter, a ton of had 4 Cyber Ocularis, because there's some really great bonuses of which you can pass through from the Cyber Ocularis and deny cover saves and various bits and bobs, or make cover saves worse rather. And it just slotted in really well. So the 45 Thalax and the Magos was a Tagmata army. And then the rest of the squads were 5 squads of 9 Thalax. 3 squads have 3 photon thrusters, and the other 2 squads have 3 multi-melters. And they're all equipped with heavy chain blades, melter bombs, and the Destructor special rule. And the Destructor special rule essentially gave you tank hunters. And then every other Thalax was the basic weapon, which was a lightning gun. Now, the reason why I quit the squads how I did was because I knew if you were going to have one model, but with a couple of different weapons, they had to take on everything. They had to be able to deal with vehicles effectively. They had to deal with Terminators and AP2 really effectively, and they needed to deal with Marines. And we all know that, firing a load of AP4, AP5 shots at Marines, if you've got tons of firepower, you can whittle them down. But if you've got a small amount of models, it's not going to work. So they all need the potential to get through that 3-up armor. And that's exactly what the army does. Every single weapon in that army is either AP1 for the multi-melters, AP2 for the photon thrusters, and then the lightning guns have the potential to rend. So every weapon in the army is AP1 or AP2 or AP4 if it doesn't get rend. And then to deal with vehicles, you've got the multi-melters, of course, but then you've got the melter bombs, because the rules change slightly. You can now use the same grenade for the whole squad. So you're not just using that one melter bomb, you're now using 9 melter bombs. So I tried to make the squad as versatile as possible to be able to take on any foe. And I'll be honest with you, they've done really well. They've taken down Horus and Tenjastarian. They've taken down a few Primarchs. They can deal with super heavy vehicles quite effectively. And the army has been so much fun to play with. I cannot recommend it enough. But also as well, owing to my personality, playing the army is an absolute roller coaster of a ride. You know, you're up and down so much. Your game's seesaw, and a lot of the times you're relying on those sixes to glance vehicles, particularly from the front, because the photon thrusters are lance weapons and they're strength 6. You always want those sixes, and that's why I equip them with Destructor, because you get a reroll for Tank Hunter. So, you know, if I review the first half of the army when I started, the 45 Phalanx and the Magos, it was incredibly fun to play with, but very, very tricky. But it taught me some really great points about the game. It taught me that capturing objectives and having scoring units in an army is really, really important. Whereas because I didn't have that before in the Legio Cybernetica. But also it taught me about target priority, which is really key. You need to make sure you've got the right weapon against the right target. I mean, you guys all know that, but it becomes so much more to the fore when you've got one model or one type of model with a few different weapon options. So that's really key. The other thing the army taught me, which is really, really key, is the paint scheme. So I painted the shoulder pads and all the metal and everything else repetitively 45 times. And what that did is that locked that colour scheme in my head. Sometimes you'll see armies that have been painted over a year or 2 year period, and you can tell the difference from when they were started in the beginning and when later units were painted later on down the line. And for me, having that consistent colour across the board, whether the army spans 6 months or 2 years, is really important. I know it's a really silly thing, but what it does mean is that it stops me from going, oh goddamn, that unit is a different colour, I've now got to go back and repaint it, which I would do, because that's the sort of thing I would do. So what this allows me to do is it just keeps it consistent, and I don't have to go back and repaint stuff, which is fantastic. But also as well, painting one model, 45 times, you get good at painting that model really quickly. So I painted all of the Phalanx together in one big chunk, and then I painted all of the vehicles together. And again, that delivers consistency. But the first couple of times I painted the Phalanx, I just chucked the model. So I was still practicing getting the right curve and the blend on the shoulder pads and everything else, and developing the colours. But once I'd cracked it, I dumped the first 2 or 3, and then I just cracked on with the rest of the squad. And you know what? It went really quickly. When you're repeatedly painting these little booster rockets, so they've got 2 little booster rockets on the end. There's 2 on each one, so there's 90 of those little booster rockets, and they were all painted separately as well. So I still think they can be pulled off on the back here. Yeah, they can. So I drilled and pinned every single one and painted it separately. Now, I know you might think that's a real pain, and I spent 2 days pinning virtually everything. So the heads, the upper torsos and the lower torso, they're all painted separately, and it just allowed me to just pick a little armature up, spray it, next one, bomb, bomb. And the Phalanx were painted really, really quickly. And the same thing I did with the tanks. I painted all of the side panels first, because that's the biggest block of colour. And then if anything had like something running down the middle, like these along here, I just painted it all in one go, and then I went in and did all the detail after. And hopefully you'll see the consistency, and the gradation on the side is all virtually at the same level. It's pretty much bang on, and that's just how I like to do things. And I'm embarking on a Death Guard project now. I want 100 tactical Marines or 100 Marines in the list. So I'm just hoarding Mark III armor at the moment, and I've got about 30 Marines at the moment, and I've just stripped them all down to their component parts, glued them, trimmed them all up. I'm going to paint the legs, torso and arms together, but the heads, the weapons, the pouches and the close combat weapons are all going to be painted separately on armatures, and the backpacks, I'm just going to do them all separately. Now you might say, well, that's a real pain. It's not that bad. You just get really good at painting something really, really quickly, and then you just continue it along for the rest of the army, which, and also, if you do the boring stuff first, because painting tactical Marines or Phalanx isn't really that exciting, or if you're painting Thralls, for example, it just gets it done. And I just put an audio book on, or some music in the background, or a movie on, which is what I'm sure you do, or a channel battle report, or a podcast on in the background, and I just crack on with it, and the time just flies. Anyway, I'm waffling. All right, so that's where the 35 Thalax came from, and that was a Tagmata list, as I said. Now, you might say to me, well, why didn't you go straight in for an auto-reductor list? Because there's some really great benefits for running an auto-reductor over a Tagmata. And you're right, there is. The main one being a rule called Matrix in Ruin, which is where essentially you ignore charging through difficult terrain, moving through difficult terrain, you just move wherever you want, and adds an element of predictability to your game, which is really cool. Now, the reason why I didn't do it, which is a stupid reason, is that I couldn't build my HQ the way I wanted to build it. I wanted him to have a jetpack, because you can't have a jetpack on an Arch Magos Reductor or a Magos Reductor. It's not there in the options. And to qualify for an auto reductor, the army has to be led by a Magos Reductor. So that was a bit of a bummer. And I thought, well, I'm not too worried about that. It's fine. And that's why I ran a Tagmata list. So you might say to me, well, you've just hamstrung yourself straight away. All those extra bonuses have got to be worth more than just having a Magos that can keep up with the rest of the Thalax. And yeah, maybe you're right, but this is where my personality comes in. I like stuff to be the way they are. And also at the time, I'd built the Magos with a jetpack anyway, which was probably the silly thing to do. I should have built it without it. But instead of just going, oh, don't worry about the jetpack, he's not got it, I just ran with it. And do you know what? It actually worked. It was better to have the better options on the Magos Prime than it was to have an Arch Magos Reductor that didn't quite fit the theme. Because I wanted the Magos Prime had double melter. I wanted him to run with either a melter squad or a photon thruster squad. So it kind of worked. Anyway, so later on down the line, I decided to introduce some tanks into the army, because I knew I wanted more tanks than I did in my original Cybernetica list, or my original Tagmata list rather. So I started to introduce tanks, which added a real punch to the army that the Thalax couldn't bring to bear, and that's mainly in the Kraus Venators here. They've got a range of 36 inch, a fast tank as well, so they move 12, 5, 36, strength 9, AP 2, ordnance. I think they're pinning as well. So really great punch to the army, and allowed me to take out those much larger units a lot quicker. Whereas with just the Thalax, they really had to plan where they had to deploy, and they had to double up on their firepower. So in the army, there's always redundancy. So that's why I took multiple units of each same type and composition, because I knew if one photon thruster squad couldn't take out that Sakaran in the background, I needed another squad with long range firepower from photon thrusters to do it. But also what it allowed me to do is to deploy the photon thruster armed Thalax on either side of the board and get those side armor shots really early on in the game, and shut down the units that would mince through the Thalax in the first couple of turns, because not only were they my scoring units, they were my line breaker units, and I needed them to take out really high value targets. So I had to get rid of the Sakarans or anything AP4 with either las cannons or auto cannons, or get rid of those contemptors quite early on, and then the Thalax could then focus on capturing objectives. So introducing some tanks and reducing the number of Thalax in an auto reductor list allowed the Thalax to concentrate on objectives, but also harrying the other units. But the tanks then took on the heavy lifting, and 8 shots from a squadron of Venators can pretty much put down anything, and they do really well, and they can insta kill 2 wound Terminators and really make a dent in Primarchs quite early on. So I had some really fantastic success with the 2 Kraus Venators, really good tanks. Definitely recommend them. The standard Kraus, these guys here, large blast, strength 7, AP 3, shred and rending, I didn't have a lot of luck with. And the reason why I took these was because I found with the Thalax army, I was really struggling to get through 20 TAC Marines. Or what would happen is I would try my hardest to get rid of 10 tactical Marines. Then there would be 2 left. I wouldn't quite kill the squad. And then those 2 Marines would then scuttle off towards the back of the board or into terrain or completely out of sight. And then I couldn't score the points for taking that unit out, or they just hunkered down on an objective and they scored a point. So I was really struggling getting through tactical Marines. I was fine with Terminators and real high value targets, but I just couldn't get through the massed ranks of Marines. So I started to introduce these 2 tanks here. But for some reason, they just kept scattering. They didn't work. Or when they hit, my rolls were pretty bad, despite the Strength 7 and the Shred. It just couldn't do the business for me. And I thought, well, for 125 points each, I might as well just pay an extra 25 and upgrade to the Venator. So that's those guys. I still run them every so often, but not that much. I also took a couple of Triaris armoured conveyors. I had these in my original Tagmata list when I was running 40 Tech Thralls. So 20 Tech Thralls in a Triaris is a fantastic thing to see. It's amazing. These work really well, so you can load a squad of 9 Thalax in these, get them into position, use that shock prowl or the shock ram attack on a Spartan or a Rhino. Not only is it a strength 9 attack, it's also a haywire attack as well, so that works brilliantly. Took out loads of Rhinos and some hull points on some Sicarans, and even took out a couple of hull points on a couple of super heavy tanks like a Falchion or a what's the one with the cannon shoots at the front? A Glaive. So even taking a couple of hull points off a Glaive with one of those. But they guarantee that they will get your Thalax into a position to either get some side armor shots with the multi-melters or onto an objective quite safely. So they work really well. But also in game, they're a massive line of sight blocker. So you can move into an enemy's face. Next turn, get out. If you moved your full 12 inches, you can move out, get out the next turn, and have a huge slab of a tank to conceal 9 Thalax behind. Because 9 Thalax is a big unit, but a Triaris armoured conveyor will conceal them if you get it into the right position. So it had some really great success. That twin link mortar bolt cannon is fantastic for taking Marines down. So that works really well. Next, we'll move on to the Kragnos assault tank. Now, again, the reason why I took these was to get rid of those TAC Marines hunkering down in a building. The attack ignores cover. They've got it's Radphage as well, so it loads of toughness. So great for taking out Castellax and reducing their toughness. But again, had some real issues with the shot scattering and just not getting onto that tactical unit. But then even if I hit and I got some good wounds, I think it's only AP4, and it just really struggled to get through Marines. So I've not had major success with the Kragnos. On paper, they're really solid tank. They're a little pricey at 225 points, but I think they're a really good solid choice, but they haven't delivered for me just yet. I live in hope that they will deliver, but not just yet. The side Sentinel weapons are really cool. They're a 3-shot strength 7 shred and rending attack and can fire independently to the tank. So what I generally do is keep these guys at the back, firing shells 60 inches down onto the battlefield. They can pretty much touch everything, and then if you tag them with the Cyber Ocularis, they can shoot anything that the Cyber Ocularis can see. So they're a really great combination there. And then if anything outflanks, they can then blast away with the Sentinel weapons and do some great stuff there. So mixed results. I think on paper they're fantastic, but they've yet to prove themselves to me. If we look a little bit closer about the Auto Reductor 4, so on screen now is just a rough list that I take. So you can see there's 3 or 4 squads of Thalax, generally 3, and then supported by the vehicle. So that's roughly the list that I take, and that's 3k. But if we look at some of the Auto Reductor rules, they're really, really great. The main one, again, being that Walkers in Ruin. Those tanks haven't got to worry about immobilizing themselves, which is really frustrating. Although, to be fair, they do have, I think it's Galvanic Traction Drive, which allows you to re-roll dangerous terrain tests. But this one now they just ignore. But also in games where line breakers are a thing, they count the scoring as well. So because the Cryos can move 12 inches and still fire, they're a fast tank. They're really good turn 3, turn 4, turn 5 to start making maneuvers to the enemy's deployment zone and score those additional victory points. So that really helps sometimes. I won a couple of games at Scribes of War last year due to that very reason, the Cryos getting into the backfield. But also, don't forget you can turbo boost them as well. So if you've got no target, move it 12 and then, sorry, not turbo boost, you can flat it out as well. So that really helps. Another rule to look for is they have a unique force organizational chart, which essentially gives you an additional heavy support slot. So when I run Auto Reductor, heavy support slot is taken by 2 Venator, that's 2, and then 3 and 4 because of Kragnos are individual. So that gives me my 4 heavy support choices, and then the rest of the slots are filled out by the Thalax. So works really, really well. And that extra heavy support slot is brilliant. The other great thing about Auto Reductor, it gives you access to some additional tank units. You can get the Minotaur battery in there, but also a lot of players are using the Solar Auxilia Basilisk models, which look really cool. The reason why I haven't done that is because I love the look of the Mechanicum tanks, and that's just a personal choice, and therefore I've just ran with tanks available from the Mechanicum range. So I've seen a couple of the Basilisk, with the armored, the reinforced armored cockpit and stuff. They look really great, but for me, I just love the quirky, weird nature of the Mechanicum tanks. If we look at this Cryos here, you've got the weird. You've got the driver in the back, and normally he's a robed kind of Mechanicum adept in the back. I've converted them and put a Skylux Guardian Automata Carapace shell in replacement because I just wanted the tanks to be like they're slaves to the Archmados Reductor. But I just love all the brass and the unique guards and grills, and you've got all the kind of steampunky style stuff on the side of the engine casings there. So I love that, and that's why I haven't gone for the other alternatives. Again, the other thing about Auto Reductor is that Walker in Ruin special rule. So now the Thalax can move unhindered in the battlefield. When they use their jetpacks in the assault phase, if they are in difficult terrain, they have to take dangerous terrain tests. That does bug me because it's an element of unpredictability in the game. And if anybody knows me, they know I hate random stuff. So I hate the random rolling for warlord traits. I personally think you should always be able to pick your warlord trait, because you can build an army around a warlord trait or build a character around a warlord trait, and then when you combine that with the Rite of War and a legion list, it can make for a really flavoursome, really cool army. So removing that, taking a wound from moving through difficult terrain, really bugs me. So to get rid of that is brilliant. But also as well, if you're charging through difficult terrain, if it ever comes to that, you're not hindered and you're not just stuck out in the open, which is brilliant. I love that. Because the other thing you have to bear in mind is there's so many photon thrusters in the army. Every turn, I'm taking 2 or 3 wounds from photon thrusters get hot, which is a real pain. But the Thalax are resilient enough, to weather that storm. They've got 3 wounds, and because they're so maneuverable, and it's a little bit cheeky, I know, but you can, if you've got a Thalax who's down to 2 wounds at the front of your squad, because they've got so much maneuverability in their movement characteristic, you can then switch them to the back of the squad, which means the squads last so much longer than they normally would do. They're toughness 5, 3 wounds. They are armoured 4, which is obviously the bane of Carey's pattern assault cannons or anything that's AP4, but they have a feel no pain of 6 up, which, I make quite a few 6 up feel no pains, and each squad is so resilient. Having said that though, a Contemptor armed with a Carey's pattern assault cannon and a close combat arm rinses a squad of Thalax in 1 turn, if the Thalax don't manage to strike back with their melter bombs and destroy the Contemptor. And I've had it so many times where they've just folded to a Contemptor. It's so frustrating. So I do tend to target them quite early, because I know from experience I've had bad experience with them. But if you've got Venators in the squad, so don't worry too much and just target them with the Venators, because they do a great job of destroying Contemptors. As for the army being completed, yes, it's finished now. I've spent probably the best part of 4 years collecting Mechanicum now, and they have been a fantastic force to collect. Initially, when I started, there wasn't many Mechanicum players out there, and I think when the army was released, they were considered to be a bit overpowered. But I think as the legions have developed with extra special characters and new rules coming out, and new vehicles as well, particularly Arcus, the Mechanicum have been tempered a little bit. But I also think that anything new onto the scene that's a bit of an exception from the norm is always reviewed with a little bit of caution, and they kind of have a period of maybe 6 months where they're really good, and then people actually get used to them and they play games against them, and they know how to adapt their army to deal with a new army, for example. I definitely think that's true, and we can draw a parallel to the Custodes. When they came out, I mean, they still are powerful, but they should be for a reason, and they've definitely been tempered in the last year or so. But when they came out, they were just through the roof, and nobody knew how to deal with them. And I think that was the same with Mechanicum. But as I said, as more people get games against them and they work out how to play them, then I think they're okay. The one thing I love about running the 45 Thalax list is when you go to an event or tournament or you play against someone and they go, "Oh, what have you brought?" Mechanicum. They instantly go, "Oh God, it's going to be Castellax and Thanatars, isn't it?" But then when you pull out 45 Thalax, they're like, "Huh, okay, that's different," and that's really cool, because I knew when I was playing Legio Cybernetica with 3 Thanatars, 3 Voltarax, 10 Castellax, Scoria before he got a model, and 2 Archmagos Archmagos Dominus, I kind of knew my opponent had gone, "Oh, geez, it's going to be one of those games," and I totally get that. And after playing this game for so long, I understand that. But for me, I was the opposite. I was worried about playing Marine list because I knew the weaknesses in the army. I knew I could take out pretty much anything in that army, but it was whether I could take enough out and stop those tactical Marines or that scoring unit scoring those points early on, because I knew if I didn't do that in the first couple of turns, I'd lost the game. And because I was so well rehearsed with them, I knew at what point I've lost that game, because you can tot up victory points in your head, you know what will do what. So I think my player was groaning inside because it was like, "Oh God, another Cybernetica list with all the crazy Thanatar in." But as I said, from my side, I was worried because I knew the weakness of the army, and I don't think people got that all they saw was just models being removed. But ultimately, they would win because the game, and as we all know, this is won on scoring objectives, and that's one thing the Legio Cybernetica list was really bad at. Now it's the opposite with the Thalax. I know I can score points. It's just not having enough firepower to bear on the enemy. And so again, I'll go back to what you guys must be screaming at the screen of me saying, "Well, why don't you just build a well-rounded, normal, whatever normal is in Mechanicum, list that's got a little bit of heavy support, a little bit of this, a little bit of that?" And the true answer is, the way I build a Legion list, a Mechanicum list, a Solar Auxilia list, whatever, for me has to be something that I believe in, or something that I want to explore and is an extension of myself. And I think we see that in people's lists all the time. It's not a net list downloaded that will annihilate every single army to here around the world. It's just what I want to play, and it's really fun. And as I said, my personality is really high and really low, and it's full of emotion and adrenaline, and playing that double-edged sword all the time is really important to me because I want to enjoy my games, but I also want to give my opponent a good game, and give them a list that they're not used to playing, because it forces them to play in a different way as well. So it just makes the game fun for everyone. And I love that this army win or loses on a dice roll, because if I'm not getting that many 6s for either the Feel No Pain on the Thalax or from the Photon Thrusters penetrating, I have increased my odds by giving them Destructor. That's why I've ran the Destructor upgrade on them. But if you're not getting those 6s consistently, your game can bomb really quickly, turn 2, turn 3. And then all you're doing then is just making sure you don't get wiped out. But also it's really fun for 9 Thalax to bring down a Glaive, or to all those Multi-Melters and Photon Thrusters. I've had my entire army fire into Horus or Primarch and brought him down, which is brilliant. But then I've also fired my entire army at a Spartan, and it's still got 3 hull points left. So, it's that double-edged sword about how you play. And I think injecting your own personality in your army is really important. And if we look at the Death Guard army, I'm started to build. I've done a test piece recently. You've probably seen it. I've just ordered 60 Mark III Tactical Marines. And when they arrive, I plan on painting 100 Tactical Marines in the same way that I painted the Thalax, because I want to get the Tac Marines done because they're quite boring. But the process of which I've embarked on is quite a labour-intensive process. So I just want to bang them out as fast as possible. And then the only things I'm going to add is I'm going to have 6 Rhinos, tons of Rhinos. So Tac Marines in Rhinos, supported by Death Shroud and Grave Wardens and Typhon. And that'll be it. Might have a Spartan to put Typhon and some Terminators in, but that's it. I'm going for tactical and Rhino spam, supported by some real heavy hitters like the Grave Wardens. And that for me is cool. I love the fluff of the Death Guard. I love the fact that they're just grimly advancing into the face of the enemy, bolters held aloft, just firing as they go. And I love that. And they're supported by these much more elite elements. You know, I did consider a 3 Spartan list, but fill the Spartans with Tac Marines, so 25 Tac Marines. 20 Tac Marines supported by maybe a Consul or a Centurion, and then have some Apothecaries in there. I still might do that. I think that'll be really cool. But we've seen on the channel, the way to win games is through weight of firepower and scoring those objectives. And if you've got 60, 70 Tactical Marines, 80 Tactical Marines in the army on objectives, you're going to score points, even if they are assaulted by a 50-man assault squad from the Blood Angels, full to the guilds of AP3. You're going to do some damage, but you might fend them off as well, and you'll score some points. So I really like the idea of that. But I also know it's going to be a really stressful, a really time-consuming game. But I kind of like that. And I like the fact that it will be different, because if I say I'm taking Death Guard, they're going to expect the Reaping, with tons of heavy weapons. And when I first embark on the Death Guard, they won't have that. It will just be Tactical Marines. There's no doubt that the Death Guard will expand, and they will start to include some Spartans and some Sicarans and a Flyer and jet bikes, and every unit you can think of, the Death Guard will have them, because they will be a channel army. So I'll need to have a little bit of everything to build multiple lists of lots of different things. But the core of the army will be based on the Tactical Marine. But also as well, if I paint 100 Tactical Marines in the next 2 months now, I'll never need to paint a Death Guard Tactical Marine ever again in my entire life. You'll have more than you'll need. And I plan on making some of the weapons interchangeable, so if I can have a heavy bolter squad or an autocannon squad, you can just whip the weapons off and do that way, so it works. Sorry, that was a really long explanation to tell you that I'm not collecting any more Mechanicum. Sorry. There are other Mechanicum lists which I would love to do. I would love to, and this goes back to the Death Guard list, I would love to do Tech Thrall spam. I love that idea. I think that would be really cool. 6 Triarch armor conveyors with 20 Thalax in each. I mean, that's 120. Thralls, 120 Thralls. That's bonkers. And there's a special character which allows you to bring on a dead unit. I think. Well, it could be Solar Auxiliary. Anyway, it would be a really cool army to see, but I need to move on, really. The Thalax have consumed my life for a long time, and I think maybe that the legions need to be explored now, which I'm really excited to do. The other thing which I had considered was going back to a Legio Cybernetica list, but now Scoria has been released. I wanted to do an army in Scoria's colours, but I've kind of been with a Legio Cybernetica. I know the highs and lows of that army, and sometimes they have been really painful to bear. So I don't think I'll put myself through that again. So probably not going to bother, but I might buy some just to paint up and for my own personal collection, I guess. But I love that Scoria model, and the Castellax is what got me into the Heresy. It really spoke to me. The Castellax head that's buried deep within the torso. It's just that little bit of copper on top, isn't it? And then with the power blades, with the shoulder mounted weapon. I mean, it just looks so scary and imposing, and that's why I went for them. But for now, Mechanicum on the back burner. Done. Sitting here talking to you guys, I'm just casting my eye over the army, and one thing I love about it, which I think was fairly deliberate when I designed it, was there's not many rules to remember. My brain really struggles to retain information. So, and I'll give you a really good example of that. Facebook, or guys that come to the channel, people I talk to, they go, "Oh, do you remember when that ship, came across that planet and that particular unit and that company disembarked and took on that particular faction?" And I'm blown away. I'm absolutely in awe of people that can retain that sort of granular detail, and I can't. I can't remember that sort of detail. And then if you then add that to rules and then stats for all the armies, I just can't do it. It's too much. So the army is purposely restricted to only a few number of units. And I think that's why also I went for the Thanax, because it's one stat line to remember and then 3 different weapons. Brilliant. And for me, that's really easy to remember, because if you've ever played me in a game, I'm quite fast. I can dice roll quite fast, and I can just, bomb, 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 bomb. And the army lends itself to that style of play, because it's such an emotional roller coaster for me. I just want to get the game in and done, and then finish, and I can relax. But so I'm probably not the best person to play against, if I'm honest with you. But looking at it now, I think that's why it's very, very restricted. But as I said, it's a double-edged sword, isn't it? Because if you restrict yourself too much, you then restrict your options available to you. But I think if you collect a very narrow slice of models or very few units, it allows you to adapt. So instead of always relying on that Fire Raptor or that Terminator squad, or always relying on that Spartan, the real crutches of armies, if they're destroyed, you've put all your eggs in one basket, or you've pinned your hopes on that Spartan reaching the middle of the table, and it can throw you psychologically. Whereas when I'm running the 45 Thalax, yes, their firepower is really important, but I've not put my army into 1 or 2 units. I don't mind losing a couple of Thalax. So from that point of view, it's really interesting. And the same with the tanks. If I lose 1 squadron of Venators, I know I've got another squadron of Venators to back it up. And because they are such a fast tank, I can move them from one side of the board to the other, which is great. And when I play a 3K list with the Thalax and the tanks, what I generally do is I generally divide the army into 2 equal halves, so it's virtually identical. And then I put it on either side of the board, hoping for some side armor shots, move some stuff up through the middle, and then the other stuff outflanks. Not literally outflanks, but just moves around the board. And for me, it's good because it means that both flanks are the same. But then, having said that, though, I know not armies are all the same on the other side, but it just allows me a little bit more control, and I can rationalise it in my head a little bit more. It's probably not the best way to play. It's probably why I don't win that many games, but maybe I need to look at that. But when they do win, this, it's a really, really great feeling, and knowing that persisting on with a very restrictive list, it does work. But it also teaches you, as I mentioned earlier, the importance of capturing objectives or firepower, and having that redundancy built into the list. So if one squad doesn't do it, another squad is there, ready, aimed to try and take out the rest of the squad that you're firing at. So for me, I like it because it brings an element of predictability into my game, and we mentioned that before. And for me, it works. It won't work for everybody, but you learn a particular play style. All right, that's it. That's my army focus completed. I really hope you've enjoyed this. If you've got any comments or questions, please leave them below. I would love to answer those if I can. Don't forget, we're in lockdown at the moment. That's fine, and I've done my showcase, but we really want you to come on with your army. We'll set up a nice little board display for you. We'll get you in. We'll ask you a load of questions about your army, and you can tell the world why you collected White Scars, or why you collected Solar Auxilia, or Blood Angels, or whatever you've got. And we all know you guys love getting your stuff out on a kitchen table. This is essentially all it is, but we're just getting you in front of the camera so you can share your hobby with the world. So if you are keen, please email me. It's david@the30kchannel.com, or you can contact me on social media. It's just @the30kchannel on Instagram. You know where to find me, so please get in touch, and I would love to get you on for your army focus. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.